and welcome to episode 171 of the PowerScore LSAT podcast. I'm Dave Kaloran in Napa Valley.
And this is Jon Denning in Los Angeles.
John, how are you today?
I am recovering, my man, after a very, very long week, really, at this point almost, of the August LSAT. I finally got some sleep last night, and I'm caffeinating my way through the day. Things are good.
Yeah, usually when you say you're recovering, I think that you've been out partying, but I know that you've been partying with the LSAT recently, so not quite as fun.
I've been partying with a bunch of online friends, all trying to figure out this test together. And I think, at least for the two of us, Dave, we feel like we have gotten there in terms of piecing together exactly what's happened, and we're here today to talk about it.
Yeah, I think our confidence is high and it is justified, so we feel pretty comfortable about it, and I'm actually excited to get into it. But as usual, beforehand, if you say you're caffeinating, what are you drinking?
Yeah, well, I think I've earned this. I usually go Irish coffee if I need a little bit of caffeine and a pick-me-up, and I'm Jameson, obviously, because I've earned it. But in this case, I'm actually going with what's called an Irish Americano. And I say what's called, I made this up. But an Americano is really just a coffee that you dump a bunch of espresso shots in. I made it Irish because I did have some Jameson. So this is Jameson, some coffee, and then 2 espresso shots. So if I sound a little cracked out by the end of this, again, now you know why.
Wait, there's coffee and then you put 2 more espresso shots in the coffee?
Yeah, you heard me.
You're gonna die.
But no, see, the Jameson balances it out. It's a very delicate cocktail.
Oh, this is your theory.
Yeah. I'm a scientist.
I'm glad you're not my bartender. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, well, I would both be dead. I should be no one's bartender. That's the one job
Indeed.
I definitely could not hold down. What about you? Speaking of bartenders, you have a wife who makes amazing drinks. Did she make yours today?
Of course. She's excellent at that, and I have 0 skills when it comes to that kind of thing, so I defer to the real expert on that. And earlier this week, we went out to a local restaurant that is pretty nice, and they made these lemon drop martinis. This is not something I would typically get. Anything with the word martini in it is just not really for me. But these were really good. So she got home and then endeavored to make her own version of it and succeeded. So we've been having one of those occasionally over the last week. And I said, that's perfect for today because the lemon drop part is obviously what I like. The martini part I don't like, but the lemon drop overpowers it, so I'm good.
Oh, there you go. All right. Well, you were hard at work through this LSAT as well. You had a couple students who were able to come in pretty clutch with some good info late in the weekend. Saved us and clarified some things. So kudos to them and certainly to all the people who were able to help me out directly. A huge collective thank you guys. It's much appreciated and we're here to hopefully try to return the favor best we can. However, as a bit of a ominous preface, it's not all going to be good news today, at least not for everyone. These things never are. Some people are going to get good news. Some people are not going to hear what they want. And Dave, you kind of foreshadowed the song that I happened to stumble on for today. You were texting me something and I was like, man, some people might not love that. And you texted back something to the effect of, well, that's just the way it is. And immediately I heard the melody for an old Bruce Hornsby and the Range song titled appropriately The Way It Is. So we decided rather quickly that that's the song that we would pick for today's episode. Good old Bruce Hornsby. I know he's one of your favorites.
No.
No.
We didn't decide that this would be the song. You wanted it to be the song, and I said, all right, I'll agree because I think I've picked more of the songs than you. This song is old too, man. Yeah. It's like the 90s or something.
That's
80s.
Yeah. Well, given some of the songs you've picked, it's not that old. But I know you hate this guy, so that made me extra happy.
I just find this music uninspiring, let's put it that way. He's talented, there's no doubt about it. I'm not saying anything about the musical skill, but there's some types of music where I listen to it and I'm like, change the channel. Bruce Hornsby is totally in that vein for me. So
next week,
those of you wondering, go listen to that
and
song.
Then it's a whole Michael McDonald run. I'm gonna thrill you.
Yeah, Yam will be there. No, not for me again. Michael McDonald, get out of here.
All right. Well, anyway, so there's our drinks. There's our song. That's the way it is. Let's talk a little bit about the LSAT world and see what's going on there. And this will be rather quick because really I think all we need to cover here are some upcoming tests for the rest of the year. We've only got 3 left now at this point, and then a few webinars, one of which certainly we want to emphasize among those over the next couple of months. Let's start with the tests coming up Obviously, the August test just wrapped. Hopefully, again, if you took it over the past several days, things went well for you. The score release for this is going to be Wednesday, 9 a.m., early Wednesday morning Eastern Time on August 27th. And then we have 3 tests remaining over the next 3 consecutive months, September, October, November. I'm going to just bang through a couple of dates here very quickly. The September registration deadline has passed. It was back in July. The test dates for September this year, September 3rd through the 6th, that's a typical Wednesday through Saturday like we just had in August. That school release is going to come out on September 24th, as always, a Wednesday morning. And then we get the October test. Those dates are going to be October 3rd and 4th. This is a weird one, so I'm emphasizing this first. That's a Friday and a Saturday. It starts on a Friday, goes Saturday, skips Sunday, and then concludes on October 6th and 7th, which is a Monday and a Tuesday. It's the first we've ever seen them run a test like this. Friday, Saturday, Monday, Tuesday, but that's how October is going to go. The registration deadline for the October test, you still have time to sign up for this. The deadline for that is August 21st. So 8/21 is the registration deadline. If you're thinking about that having just taken August, that's probably a little disappointing sounding because you're not going to get your August score until the 27th of this month, and yet you have to sign up for October by the 21st of this month. So there's about a 6-day gap there in the wrong direction. Here's the good news. LSAT has extended the refund deadline for October to the 28th. So you will get your August score back on the 27th of this month, and you can get your money back for October the next day if you want to, or by the next night. So if you sign up for October by the 21st, get your score for August by the 27th or on the 27th, you can then get your money for October back if you don't need to take that October test by the 28th. I know that's a lot of numbers floating around, but you get your score back for August on a Wednesday. You can request your October money back by Thursday night the following day. In other words, there's really no risk in signing up for October at this point if you think you might need to take it. If you get your August score and like the number, just get your money back for October and you're done. No harm, no foul. You will get that October score back on Wednesday, October 24th. And then there is one more test this year. It's in November. The registration deadline for that, you've got more than a month, so no real hurry there. The registration deadline there is September 25th. The test dates for November, thankfully, go back to normal. It's a Wednesday through Saturday again, November 5th through 8th, and you'll get that score right around Thanksgiving, Wednesday, November 26th. I believe that's Thanksgiving Eve, if I'm not mistaken.
They did that last year.
Yeah. So you'll either have a lot to be thankful for or a lot to drink about, or possibly both.
Yeah, and I'll notice, something that you were talking about, the registration deadline for November is the day after the September scores come out. And then you talked about how LSAC has made that change. I will once again say, why do it this way, LSAC? You know you're going to change it. You do it every single time. Stop fooling around and just set these dates properly. This has been going on for several years now where you're like, here's our schedule, and then everybody complains. You're like, all right, we'll move it a week back. Just do it from the beginning and stop screwing around.
Yeah, don't make the registration deadline and the refund date different. Just make the whole deadline thing the day after school release. August scores come out the 27th. Just make the October registration the 28th. Don't make it the 21st and then the refund the 28th. Why split them? That's silly. But that is where things stand right now. So just know these days. Make sure you don't miss the October registration if you might need to take that test. It is August 21st if you want to take October. Don't miss that date because then you're out of luck.
I've actually talked to them about this before, and the claim is we need all these weeks to get it done. I'm like, yes, at some point in the past, I do believe that was the case when, everything was on paper and, pre-computer era. I think now, there's enough of a programmatic approach to this, enough computer power out there that you don't need weeks and weeks and weeks. You can set this so this actually plays out properly.
I'll point out that the difference between August 28th and the start of the October test on October 3rd is virtually identical to the registration deadline for November, September 25th, and the start of the November test, November 5th. And yet, they didn't make the deadline for October the 28th. They made it the 21st. Why?
I don't know, John. Maybe they're absorbed in the recent lawsuit filed against them for price fixing. That might be where their minds are at, and they're not really thinking about, let's get all this stuff scheduled right. I know that's not the case. Scheduling came out way before the lawsuit. But the lawsuit is another conversation that maybe we'll have a podcast on and discuss how LSAC has been sued as part of a class action lawsuit over essentially price fixing. Don't quote me on the details of the lawsuit. For the way CAS works and the LSAC in general. So not about the LSAT, though. So that won't affect our conversation tonight at all.
Yeah. And by the way, my yes there wasn't me reveling in the fact that it happened. It was just affirming the fact that it happened. I don't like to see them embroiled in lawsuits, typically. It's a distraction, and frankly, I'd rather them focus on getting the test right.
There's too many things going on, for a distraction. And I don't know the legal basis of that case. I've heard differing opinions from lawyers about how price fixing works and things like that. So I'll be very interested to see how deep it goes or how far it gets. But the key thing is, if you're taking any of these upcoming LSATs, as always, we have a series of free seminars online that we offer to you. And you can get those by going to powerscore.com/free seminars. That will then redirect you to a longer URL that I couldn't ever speak into existence or remember. But being redirected there is actually normal because that page doesn't exist anymore, but it's the page that we know. And coming up on August 20th, so not too far, basically a week from the time this comes out, we've got one of our favorite webinars. This is about reading comprehension. It's about the skill tests, different tests that you can give to yourself to make you better at aspects of reading comprehension. And more importantly, to diagnose where you're having trouble, what the sticking point is, so that you can thereafter go in and really work on that and improve. Then, John, on August 25th, which is a Monday, at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, because, as we will talk about momentarily, a lot of the content that we predicted for August got used. We're going to come back and update our crystal ball predictions for the September LSAT, and we're going to do what we call a September mini ball. So if you just attended the August and September crystal ball, that's the full-scale institution that we do. A bunch of the content that we talked about appeared, so we are going to update all of our predictions. And since we just did the crystal ball, the full one, a month ago, we're going to kind of downsize it and change it a little bit. That's what the mini ball is. So that will be on the 25th, a Monday. The sign up for that is on the powerscore.com website. We urge you to join us for that if you're taking September. And quite honestly, as we will talk about, we keep predicting content that they use for these tests accurately. I feel pretty confident that we're going to get September right as well.
Yeah, based on how this one went, and we'll be more specific in just a second, but based on how this one went, I feel good about September. I'm also really happy, Dave, that we were able to find a date to do this one. We had to really scramble to find a day when you and I were both free to even have this mini ball. I think this was literally the only day between now and pretty much test week in September that you and I both had a free night to do it. I get back at 1 a.m. that morning from about an 8-day trip or international. I almost said overseas. I'll be in Canada. Hardly counts. And
it's international, man.
It is international. I'm crossing a border. I hope they let me back. And then, of course, I think you're taking off the next morning. So
yeah, I'll be out for a little bit that week. So you come in, it's almost like a tag team. I cover the prior week, then you'll cover me for a little bit. Mm-hmm. Although I'm staying domestically, so I guess I'm envious of you.
Lame.
Not really. I'm going to Vegas, so it's all good.
I'm going to Vancouver, so I'll have a better view. You'll probably have more fun.
I love Vancouver. Lovely city. Probably one of the most gorgeous cities I've ever been, from the looking at the sea all the way up to the mountains. Just a beautiful place to actually go to. And I think you'll enjoy it.
Well, there you go. I'm excited. First time there, surprisingly. So
yeah. And then not to stop the train of free webinars, we've got one on September 3rd. That is Logical Reasoning, Common Flaws. Flaws are all over the LSAT. Every single section is full of them. It's good to know the ones that appear most frequently. So we'll cover that. And then on September 17th, we have got a webinar to cover the personal statement. So we'll venture back into admissions. We usually do our admissions content in the summer and then into the fall, which matches up with the admissions season. So we're going to sit down and talk about what makes a good personal statement, not from the student perspective, because we're not really too worried about that, but from the admissions committee perspective. So the audience that you are writing to. Super useful, very interesting. If you have any hesitation or concern about writing your personal statement, and you probably should, because it is a document unlike almost anything else that you've written, urge you to attend that. You can also sign up at thatpowerscore.com/free seminars.
Cool. All right. Are we ready? Should we get into it?
Slowly but surely, yes.
All right. Let's talk then about the August 2025 LSAT. This is going to be a little more streamlined than some of the tests that we've covered so far this year, because the case of August, at least, there were no international tests. This was purely domestic. As we typically do, though, Dave, let's start with a couple of just test stats, some LSAC notes, day-by-day numbers. If you want to break this down, you usually cover this pretty well on Twitter. Some people may have seen these numbers, but just a quick rundown if you don't mind.
Yeah, and some of the information that I was pulling from LSAC was slower than normal this weekend because the ABA had its conference, the American Bar Association, had its conference up in Toronto. So they went to Canada for that. And so some of the personnel that I often talk to were otherwise distracted, but they still gave me the rundown of like what's happening during each testing day and the test overall. And the interesting thing about this August test, it's about 12% larger than last August. And last August was about 50% bigger than the year before, which tells you something. The kind of trend of upward numbers of applications, it's still going on. This is an increase that I'm a little surprised to see, but at the same time, given some of the economic uncertainty, a lot of times people will move into the grad school space. So last year we had a huge jump in August, and now we've had a 12% increase on top of that. And the test is an interesting one because it got bigger every single day. On Wednesday, you had about 5,600, 5,650 testers, which is a relatively small test group overall. Then you had on Thursday 5,800 people, then Friday 6,350 people, and then on Saturday 7,600 people came in. And these numbers have ballooned before up into like the 9,000s. I think maybe we've hit 10,000 before, if I'm recalling correctly. And usually when the numbers are like 9 or 10,000, you start running into problems. And that's why they prefer to have not just 1 or 2 days that are huge, but say 3 or 4 days that are smaller. So 76 has proven over time to be something that they can actually handle. You end up with around 25,350 test takers. So a pretty big test group. But for those who might have been tracking the registration was like over 35,000 like 6 weeks ago. So a lot of people registered for the test, and then quite naturally it melts down. And in fact, we use that as the professional term for what we're talking about. Melts down to around 25,000, and then those people usually either go to one of the further tests, September, October, what have you, or in some cases they're like, law school's not for me. But if you had any problems, and I think Jon will talk about a problem or two that we saw. There will be a retake test that will come up on Tuesday, August 19th. It'll run from about 9 a.m. Eastern to just before 7 p.m. Eastern. As the testing window, you will see different content. You should see different content than what was just administered. But you still, if you're a retaker, will get your scores at the same time as everybody else, which is August 27th at 9 a.m. Eastern.
There you go. Yeah. You typically see, you use the word melt. I like that word. Typically see more melt for August because you do still have really 3 safety net tests to follow for the same calendar year. You still got September, October, November. You get a little less melt typically in September as people feel the pressure and there's fewer opportunities to follow. And then obviously by the time you get to November, people really do feel the pressure of needing to take that test, even if it's still a bit of a gamble in terms of their readiness or their certainty about outcomes. So it's going to be interesting to watch those two comparative figures, the registration versus actual. The gap tends to shrink as you get deeper into the year.
Absolutely. And I mentioned problems. Anything that you ran across?
Well, I mean, we always talk about this systemically first. Were there any huge outages? We've seen this in the past. Fortunately, it's been a while where, did the whole system crash? Did LSAC's system go down? Do we have anything like that? I'm happy to report no. There were individual issues, of course. Test centers had some power outages. I saw one where I think the AC went out. Maybe a couple where the AC went out, and that's brutal. Some people reported the AC was a little bit strong and it was too cold. These things happen, and it's obviously tragic when anyone experiences something that's either distracting or, in some cases, almost disqualifying. They can't finish. I did see one weird thing, and I saw at least 3 or 4 people report this. I even got a couple of private messages about it, and there was a public thread on Reddit as well about this, which was that at some point for a number of different people in reading comprehension, it seems, where answer choice C, the first character, as it was explained to me, of answer choice C, and I'm quoting, looked strange. And it became a case where the person wasn't able to actually select answer choice C as an option. They would click on it, and they simply couldn't select that answer choice. They could do A and B, D and E, but C, they couldn't choose it if they wanted to for that particular question. And so they alerted the proctor. The proctor came in. The proctor tried to mess around and manipulate it and was unsure of what to do. Proctor was clicking C, selected it, deleted it, tried to like gray it out with the little like slash through thing. And C was just non-responsive, apparently, and it still didn't work. B worked, D worked, etc. And so what ended up happening, at least with the student that I was corresponding with about this, and I presume others who reported it, was they ended up having to actually restart, like reboot their system, restart their computer, log out and log back in. And not only is that hugely disruptive and distracting, but a lot of the students reported apparently that while this was happening and the proctor's in there trying to troubleshoot, the clock was still running. The timer was going. And when they restarted the test, that time was lost. It didn't restart
that's a
back
cancel
to,
for me.
Yep. It didn't restart back to when the proctor first intervened. It restarted back to the beginning. Or sorry, to where they were when they had to restart their computer. And so immediately, as you say, Dave, that's a cancel for you. Ditto. Unless I'm having the best test of my life and I know I'm still going to finish under time, that to me is immediately like, all right, I'm done. I'm not going to let this stand.
Yeah, what I'm really hoping is C wasn't the answer, and then I'm like, no, I'm just going to skip forward and choose whatever the right answer is, and I don't know on that problem, and then only flag it if it keeps happening.
And apparently that was the advice of the proctor, was to flag the question and just continue, and then again come back and see if there's some sort of, after the fact solution.
Yeah, unless it's C, in which case I'm like,
Yeah, but even
or
still,
I
to
say to
lose
the proctor,
the time,
I want C for this, and I make a complaint after and have them handle it individually. It's a weird situation for sure.
Or you finish the test and then make a decision afterwards if you find out that was real versus experimental. If it happened on an experimental section, the rest of your test went great versus a real section, and maybe you want to have a chance at a makeup. But if this did happen to you and you're sitting here nodding your head, be like, oh my God, yes, this would qualify you for a makeup, a retake on Tuesday, the 19th. And LSAT, because these sessions are recorded internally, they will have record of this. There will be a case where they can go and review your file. So you can go into your system, into your account, and submit a complaint, and they can pull this up and see that it happened. And like I said, there are public posts about this. So this is not a one-off event. This happened to multiple people, and there will be record of it.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing is if you do that retake, you don't start where this happened.
Yeah,
you don't actually just finish the sections you haven't seen. You start off from the beginning with a whole new LSAT. So it can be a really frustrating situation when this happens to somebody where it's like, I was doing fine, and now you just took that away from me.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, the person that I was talking to more in depth about this ultimately decided that they were just going to keep their original outcome. They were like, this was an issue, but it still beats having to go back and restart and do this thing all over again. So they were willing to roll with it. Other people may not quite feel the same, in which case, again, apply for the retake and you should qualify for it.
There you go.
So there you go. That was the biggest, strangest issue that I saw this past week.
All right, let's move on and move towards the actual discussion of content, which I think is part of the reason we're all here. Before we get to that, because there's always a beforehand, I'm going to make this brief, but there are some reminders and disclaimers about the use of public test content info and test difficulty and other things that we always like to talk about a little bit and make sure that everybody's on the same page. First off, as far as our podcasts and what we talk about as scaling, predictions, and so forth, we just ask that you don't summarize this online. There's usually nuance in there. The nuance always gets missed. And we'd really prefer that people hear what we say directly, and it's a free podcast, so please just refer them to this. I'll remind everyone that the section order that you had does not mean anything with someone else who had the same section order. You might have had the same exact content in the same order. You could have had the same content in different orders. You could have had partially same content, or you might not have had any content similar to anybody else that you're talking to with the same order. Sections, the content, and the order of the content change all day long. They use multiple versions of the test. As we will see, there are multiple scored RC that were used, for example. One of the things that LSAC allows is that they have kind of settled into a routine where after the test, they'll allow you to talk about generalities. They, prefer that you don't talk about that publicly until after the test ends. In this case, on Saturday night, they just ask that you don't talk about specific solutions or answers. So they don't want to see a big post on Wednesday of test week saying, this is what I just had, but on Saturday night, they really do not care. But one of the things I will say is we use all sorts of different information in compiling this. We have extensive records of our own. We have instructors out there. We have students out there. We take a look at public reports. One of the things is we can only include what we're aware for sure was used on the test. If you go through this podcast and you don't hear some of the content that you had, it's because we didn't hear from you. So we would say, send us a message, send it to lsat@powerscore.com, and let us know what it was that you saw. Sometimes people will say, hey, you didn't have my section, and then we'll discover, actually, we did, you just forgot it. That happens quite a bit. So make sure you listen carefully to what we talk. We try to give enough identifying information for each one of these sections so that you should be able to remember at least some of it. But John and I are both aware that taking the LSAT is a stressful environment. Things happen fast. It's like a waterfall. Sometimes you think, they didn't talk about my section. Make sure that's the case, because usually we have just about everything. If we don't, it's because it was not used or not administered to many people, and then we didn't hear from one of those folks. Also, when we talk about difficulty, keep in mind that we're not saying that any of these LSAT sections are easy. If we say something was easier, it's relative. We feel like every one of these tests is difficult. We know that when you take a real LSAT, it feels much worse than taking just a PT out there. So for a lot of people, they come out of the exam and think that was the worst experience ever. Probably wasn't. It's just in that moment, the anxiety and frustration makes it feel that way. John, there's so much to this.
You're getting there, man. Keep going. I'm still thirsty.
Some days I've there's more, there's less. In fact, I'm actively skipping some of these because I'm like, no, I just want to get to the content. Keep in mind that one of the things that we do is, even though all this information is non-disclosed, we've been tracking LSATs for years now, and we have extensive records. Sometimes we can tell immediately that a section is real. For example, somebody had 3 LR and 1 RC, when we know that RC is real. In other cases, we're able to use information that we have about past usages. And in fact, we did that early on Wednesday to kind of make some estimations about reading comprehension that was likely scored. And then later on, we think was proven to be the case. So a lot of this is, if something was used previously and it was scored, then it comes back as scored. So last thing I'll say, we just ask that you don't summarize it online. Just send them to the podcast. It doesn't take too long. You can even send them to this timestamp, because we are about to dive into the domestic U.S.-Canadian August 2025 LSAT.
Yes, sir.
John, the first thing we always do is we talk a little bit about the crystal ball.
That's right.
Did we get it right? You tell me.
Well, the short answer is yes. I don't know how this could have gone, frankly, much better in terms of this. But rather than just leave it at that or say take our word for it, let me actually give people a quick rundown of how this works and how we actually did. We'll give a self-assessment here that I hope is honest and fair. We've done this now 40 tests in a row, August inclusive, and assuming that people, in hearing what I'm about to say, agree that we got August right, this would make us 38 out of 40. Of the past 40 tests that we have done this for, only 2 of them have our predictions not ultimately come true. There have been 2 February tests, randomly tiny, out of these 40, where LSAC has done something kind of off the wall or outlierish, and we didn't see it coming. But other than that, 38 of those 40 we've gotten exactly right. And I would say, Dave, ultimately, that this ended up being one of our more successful tests, prediction-wise, despite some confusion, especially early on online, about how the process actually works. So indulge me for a second. I'm not going to be quite as long as you just were, but indulge me for a second as I re-explain how this goes. Here's the deal. Content on LSAT, every LSAT these days, content comes in essentially 2 forms. They always use content that is brand new, and that's stuff that we can't possibly predict. No one's ever seen it before as a scored section, so we don't try to. And there is always content on LSATs that is reused, a reappearance of past scored content. That's why they don't give the tests out to people anymore. That's why they use them as what's called non-disclosed. They give them to people, they put them back in the vault, they never release them publicly. That is the content, this reappearing, reused content. That's what our predictions are focused on. This past week on Wednesday morning, the test started with 2 sections of reading comprehension topics that were both brand new in terms of their scored usage. We had never seen either of these 2 sections of reading comprehension used as scored sections before. And so there was a bit of, I don't want to call it an uproar, but certainly some disappointment online of, man, the crystal ball blew it. The crystal, I think I saw someone call it like the crystal blow or something like that, like we had blown it. And it was just a matter of, well, no, there's always brand new content that the crystal ball's not even targeting, not even directed towards. And that's what was happening Wednesday morning. We'll get to that obviously in a second when we look at the content itself. But people were a little disappointed that our predictions didn't match. Well, frankly, they couldn't. It was all new. The LR, however, on Wednesday and used throughout the week, we had seen before, and we had specifically predicted not just the test, but the actual section that was being reused. Spoiler, it was June 2022. We had that exact LR section listed in our crystal ball. So the LR started with a hit. We also saw new logical reasoning. We saw it throughout the week. Again, no predicting that. But before long, started really Wednesday afternoon with accommodated people, we started to see some reused reading comprehension. One section that we gave you was the exact source test, October 23, and we called it the second most likely test to appear. And another, the most common to appear as solo reading comprehension all week. So people who either didn't have an experimental section or people who had 3 logical reasoning sections. The most common reading comprehension to appear all by itself all week was our top predicted test, June 2023, and all 4 topics were listed in our crystal ball. We'll get to that in just a second, but that to me is why I say this was one of our more successful predictions. Everyone, for the most part, who saw single reading comprehension had 4 topics that we listed all 4 of, and other people who had single reading comprehension had a test that we had predicted. Put shortly, Dave, everything that was reused this week came either as 4 topics that we had predicted, a logical reasoning section that we had predicted, or a source test that we had predicted. All of the reuse was in our crystal ball directly. I don't know. I said this in a Reddit post. I was like, I don't know what grade to give this, but I think at least as a passing grade. B plus,
Passing.
A minus, A.
I think it's an A.
Yeah. I don't want to do the grade inflation that seems rampant these days, but I'd say it's at least, that's at least a 90.
No, I mean, look, every time I see passages that we predicted and we predict them specifically, I know it's an A, because I know that is not something that is normally possible. So I was very happy when this actually came in. And if you're thinking, well, wait, how's this whole prediction thing? We've done podcasts on the crystal ball, so you can actually go back in our podcast archives and find it. During the crystal ball, I explain it a little bit on the front end. So we're not going to go into that. But needless to say, both LR and RC that we had predicted appeared, which meant that the recommended problem sets that we told people to work through and the topics that we asked them to look at beforehand were largely helpful. If you were able to get those sections, you were in great shape. Not everybody got them, and so unfortunately for them, they felt like it's a miss. This is the way that it is.
Yeah.
Nobody can predict all the content because some of it is new.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that content though, Jon.
There you go. Yeah, if it wasn't new, we either predicted the topics, the section, or the test itself. And that's pretty good. Otherwise, it was brand new. That's okay. That's an A. I'll take it.
The only reason I don't say A plus is because, maybe one day they won't use new information and then we'll have predicted everything. That would be the A plus.
You want to have room for us to improve on still. Fair enough. Let's start with reading comprehension. From what we were able to determine, there were 3 real or scored sections of reading comprehension in use throughout the week. These were coupled with 2 experimental sections of reading comprehension. Let's go through all 5 of what those were. And I'm going to start, Dave, with a real section, a scored section of reading comprehension from the main test that we predicted and all 4 topics that we predicted. Like I said, this was a very common section in use, particularly for people who just had one section of reading comprehension. These were the 4 passages. This came from the June 2023 test. The first passage, I believe, was the CITES treatise. I don't know if that acronym you pronounce it out or if it's just CITES.
We're going to say it is.
CITES, that's a lot better, thanks. CITES treaties, this were to protect endangered species and really how the treaties failed to do so. The comparative passage here was about Native American archaeology and indigenous people. I don't know if colonialism having an effect on this. The passage a lot of people complained about. In fact, there were a lot of memes floating around about Descartes. Skepticism, comparing Descartes with another philosopher, Santayana. And then science passage here about prokaryotes and eukaryotes and cell biology and 2 different theories for it. I believe that was the final passage in that section. Also tricky. Passages 3 and 4, skepticism and eukaryotes were both tough in that section. Hard section.
Yeah, I especially would say that the Descartes Santayana passage was one that a lot of people really, really disliked.
Yeah. I saw one meme posted up there that was like, I LSAT, therefore I am not.
The Descartes one, yeah.
I was
this
some
is a hard
confusion.
section for sure.
Yeah, that was a tough section. That was a scored section. But you would have probably known that was a scored section because I only saw that one coming up solo. The single reading comp people. There was another scored section of reading comprehension that we also predicted, not topics in this case, but source test. This originally appeared on the February 2022 LSAT. It was reused in October of 2023, which was a test that we predicted, the number 2 test that we said was most likely. And this was 27 questions, had these 4 passage topics in it. I believe the first passage was about jazz becoming, quote, high art and being accepted into the mainstream. There was a passage in there, about Simone.
I was going to say, and then financial problems around jazz, like its success actually belies the fact that it is having economic issues, and they have to go, kind of becomes more like classical music.
Yeah, I think you got a lot of good information on this passage at some point, so I think you might know more about that one than I do. Passage in there about Simone Weil, I think I'm saying that right, her socialist writings having to do with technocrats and fascist versus communist states. The comparative passage in this was about contract law, class action lawsuits and arbitrations. Sounds like a real thriller. And then the fourth passage, the science passage here, was about zebra mussels, the invasive species of zebra mussels introduced into Lake Erie, and the environmental effects, which I believe typically were negative. So they
weren't all negative.
Oh, interesting.
That was the funny thing, was like some areas apparently there was clearer water, and then there were cons, of course. They weren't really sure about it. I remember talking to someone about this who was very interested by the whole seawater aspect, like it's Great Lakes kind of thing, and it was like it wasn't just all negative, because everything I've ever read about zebra mussels is all negative, but apparently that's not the case.
Interesting. Yeah, I always thought they were kind of like lionfish or something, where they're just harmful, kind of full stop. But yeah. What do I know? So there you go. Passage I should probably read then, because clearly I'm uninformed. But that was another scored section. That one, actually, the zebra mussel section, appeared both in isolated, individual. So some people had that as their only reading comprehension section, which made it very easy for us to identify as real. And some people had it paired with one of the experimental sections that we'll get to in just a minute. The good news for us, though, Dave, at least on our side, is because we had predicted this section, or the source test, and because we'd seen this twice before, February 22, October 23, regardless of whether they had separated this out by itself or not, we knew this was a scored section. So there was really no mystery. And I kind of alluded to this on Reddit a couple of times, where I was like, the minute I saw this Friday morning, which is when this first appeared, I knew instantly that this was the scored section, even though it was part of a double RC set at that point.
Yeah, this was the one that's paired with what we'll talk about as the last experimental.
Yeah.
Which has got some interesting topics on it.
It does.
But that does not address what I think for many people was the most interesting question.
Yeah, we get to
certainly one that they faced early Wednesday, which I think is going to require a little bit of explanation.
Yeah, in fact, I'm going to put just a note here for myself. I'm going to put a timestamp on this exact moment. So I can, because this is what people are going to ask me a lot about. So that I know where exactly this happens for us, I can refer them directly to this exact moment, because there was another paired set of reading comprehension passages. And LSAC did something rather sinister here, nefarious, which is they never split the next 2 sets of passages up. 2 sections of reading comprehension, both of which contained passages that we had never seen used as scored before. These did not come from past tests as scored passages. These could not be predicted. These would both be considered, as far as you and I are concerned, as brand new in terms of like reused or scored content. And the fact that they never individualized these or split them up into a single RC test, like they did with zebra mussels or like they did with Seitz treaties, meant that on the surface of things, at least, it was virtually impossible for anyone to, at a glance, know which of these 2 sections was real and which was experimental. I'm referring
on the surface.
Yeah, on the surface. I'm referring, of course, to a section that most people would know at this point as the Invisible Man section. That was the Invisible Man novel by Ralph Ellison. Comic book references. That section also contained blackmail, illegality, the philosophy of causality, and then the efficiency of stock markets. And the section that was grouped with it, if you want me to quickly hit on this, with the Mayan civilization decline, presentism and study of history, environmental law, and then, most interesting to me, the Turing test and AI. So, and I want to interject something here, because I don't want people to think that we're like playing hide the ball. The Invisible Man section is real. Okay.
Okay. So I don't want to be like, hey, let's wait till the very end of this. I want to say which one is real first, and then talk about what's actually happening. LSAC has been doing this for a couple of tests now. They love to start off the exam with 2 RC, 2 LR formats. And then the RC that they're using is relatively new. It's not like some retread of a section that's been used repeatedly, like the zebra mussels that we just talked about, or the CITES treaty section. We've seen those a bunch of times. We know those are real as soon as we see them. These two sections haven't appeared like that previously. Well, that really is annoying because as a student, you come out of the test, you don't know which one was scored. And certainly one of the sections here, the Invisible Man, was really hard.
Really hard.
And there was a lot of difficulty on this. So what everybody comes out is they don't want that to be scored. And there were people saying, like, if that's scored, I have to take the LSAT again, and I hate LSAT. And I'm like, look, I understand that. But there are some tells here as to why this is the scored section and why the Mayan section is not the scored section. So, John, that's what I wanted to get to. I was like, let's not fool around.
I was kind of hiding the ball a little bit.
You were like going for the mystery, and I'm like, no. I didn't want a big reveal at the end. I want the info out immediately.
Yeah, fair enough. So the Invisible Man section with blackmail, philosophy of causality, the efficiency of stock market and economic outcomes and bubbles, that section, if you had it, that was your scored section. I know that's going to be disappointing for a lot of people. Like, back to Bruce Hornsby. Unfortunately, that is just the way that it is. And this is part of the luck of the draw. Dave mentioned that LSAC has been doing this for a few tests now. They did this exact same thing in April. They did this exact same thing in June. They did it here again in August, where day one, it was 2 brand new sets of reading comp, and they didn't split them up, at least not in any sort of like major way. We saw them split them up a little bit in June. We saw them split them up, as we'll talk about here, in August for a few people. Split them up in the sense of like, give one of them without the other. Give one of them as a single reading comp section. I don't know that they ever did it in April, although in April we were still able to get to the bottom of it. We got to the bottom of it here as well. Dave, let's talk a little bit about that process, because again, I would hate to just be like, Invisible Man was real, moving on.
Yeah, and we won't. We'll actually explain this because I think it's worth it. And it gives you a little bit of a lens into how this test is made at times. And this was, of course, the discussion where I said that's just the way that it is. There's nothing we can do about it.
Right.
That has to be the scored section. One of the things that you see inside the Invisible Man section is that a few of the passages have appeared multiple times. So they've been tested as experimentals on several occasions. And the way the experimental section works is, look, they're pre-testing it. They're going to test items, usually twice, sometimes more if they're making changes to them, to make sure that it actually does work and that it is a valid section. We saw Invisible Man most recently, I think, back in October 2022, or at least it started off there as an experimental section. Same thing with the blackmail one that used to be in the section where they talked about Outcasts with Andre 3000 and Big Boy. These are ones that have appeared several times as experimentals, which means they are now ready to be used as real sections. So that, by the way, was what the first tip-off was. On the other side, that experimental section with the fall of the Mayan civilization, there is another passage that is floating around, but it's not the same passage.
Right.
It's different topics. One's more about water, the other's more about politics, if I recall correctly. That Turing section has been used as an experimental before. So someone might say, they have used that as experimental. You can't say this is the differentiator. No, I can, because that was used as an experimental very recently, September of 2024.
Yeah.
They're not going to turn it around this quick and have that then be a real section. That's probably something where it's on its second testing that they're making sure. So the evidence points to multiple experimentals being presented for the first time as a scored section here with the Invisible Man section.
Yeah.
So I felt pretty confident early on looking at what was in those two sections, and I'm like, it's going to be the Invisible Man almost for sure. And then, John, later on, you saw a few individual reports of people saying, he said it on Reddit, and there was definitely skepticism, and I think the skepticism was reasonable. The problem was we saw several other people come through publicly and privately saying, credibly, that, hey, I only had one RC, I had accommodations, and the RC that I got was the Invisible Man. And so, again, I wish there was a great LSAT casino in the sky, because I would go there and bet frequently on stuff like this. I would put my money on the Invisible Man, and I'd probably put it all on it. I have no doubt that that's the scored section.
Yeah, I'd risk quite a lot on this one here, and it wouldn't feel like much of a risk. I mean, you've got 2 of the 4 passages that we know of, and they're exactly in that sweet spot of a window. October 22 for Invisible Man as experimental. October 21 for Blackmail as experimental. Again, that's just exactly the right turnaround time. You don't have anything like that in the other section. That Mayan one that Dave referenced, that a lot of people were like, wasn't Mayans on October 22 experimental as well? Different Mayan passage. The one experimentally in October 22 was about zeolites as a water filtration system for Mayans. That is not what the one this week was about. And like Dave said, the Turing test in AI, that was September of last year, experimental. That's way too soon for it to just ramp up to real. They wouldn't do it that quick. And the fact that I saw at least 6 or 7 people independently report, some accommodated, some with 3 LRs, that they had Invisible Man as their only RC. I didn't see anyone say that about Mayans. That to me was the kicker, the real, like, that tipped the final thing. But I would have said Invisible Man section was real even before I'd heard anyone say they had it by itself. In fact, interestingly, Dave, and I hadn't said this to anyone yet. I don't think I said this to you yet, even. You and I had arrived at this conclusion independently of one another. I was telling people on Friday, I think I know which one it is. I haven't talked to Dave about it. I have a strong suspicion. And then you texted me at some point on Saturday. You were like, that Invisible Man has to be the real section. And I was thinking the exact same thing, buddy. And I think that's when you texted me, no, that's just the way it is. So
yeah, you said a lot of people are going to be unhappy. And I said, no, sorry, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah. So you and I had basically...
I'm not trying to dismiss people. I'm just trying to be honest about, unfortunately,
what do we do?
I have to call it the way I see it.
Yeah, we got to tell the truth. That is the truth, unfortunately. So there you go. What that will do is we'll come back to, and what you've already said is, because that was such a hard section, we'll touch on how that's going to affect the curve when we get to that portion of the discussion.
There'll be a benefit there.
Yeah. And since we have now talked about it, let me just run through once really quickly what the passages in that were. Real section, brand new, Invisible Man novel, Ralph Waldo Ellison. Comic book references. I think there was a thing about Batman and superheroes. There was a passage in there about black male illegality, a passage about the concept and the philosophy of causality and defining the word, quote, cause. I think there was also a reference to the idea of operationalism. This is not a topic that we were alluding to or referring to in the Crystal Ball topics. There was operationalism in the Crystal Ball, but it was about something else. That's why we're very precise and specific when we list topics in the Crystal Ball. That's not the same thing. And then finally, a passage in there, the comparative passage about the efficiency of stock markets and economic outcomes and bubbles. That's your real section. Sorry, guys. Unless you like that section, in which case, congratulations. Great news. The experimental section that was paired with it for most everyone, fall of the Mayan civilization and others, I think Aztecs were mentioned, related to political water control and presentation. There's another passage in this experimental section about presentism in the study of history, had to do, I believe, with the author or historian perhaps, Lynn Hunt. A passage in there about environmental law and the intersection with business law and practices. And the comparative passage here, one I'd love to read, was about the Turing test, Alan Turing, and the human model versus the collective and the different goals of artificial intelligence, AI. So there's your experimental section that tended to go with Invisible Man. There was one more, and this will be the last of the reading comp, one more experimental section of reading comprehension. This, from what I saw, was always paired when it came up with zebra mussels. It had these 4 passages. These are experimental, if you saw them. Middle Eastern architecture, how it was influenced by the climate. So streets, the shade, how things are designed. I think it mentions the pyramids. It had a passage in there, a comparative passage about counterfactual history. I think it mentioned the idea of, like, what if the Nazis had won World War II? Sounds like a Tarantino movie or something. Statistics in court and, quote, knowledge of a crime and eyewitness testimony. I think the unreliability probably of it, or the bias that can seep in. And then finally a passage in that about new science and metaphysics in either 16th or 17th. People confuse 1700s with 18th century, and people get that mixed up. But 16th or 17th century through the lens of the 20th century. If I'm not mistaken, that passage may have actually mentioned Descartes. So there was some confusion there as well. But that section as a whole was experimental. So again, if you saw that with your zebra mussels, you can ignore the counterfactual history, focus on those mussels.
Yeah, so ultimately 3 scored, 2 experimental. Sad news is the Invisible Man is scored.
Yeah, I think that's going to bump
All
a
right,
lot
we
of people
belabored
out.
the RC point.
We certainly did.
For a while. But again, look, we're going to geek out on some weird LSAT stuff going on and some of the ways that you can figure things out, or at least we can fairly early on. So apologies for the long sidebar there about that. But again, maybe a few people are like, that's actually pretty cool, because there's a way for us to figure it out even when they don't make it completely obvious. And that's very important, because you want multiple ways of confirmation, and they all lined up there.
Yeah, I think it's also important too that you contextualize bad news. To be like, listen, there's a reason we that we know this and don't just think it.
It's not a guess.
Yeah, exactly. All right, and I'm
Let's get
putting
into
timestamps
LR.
in
I'll
here
take
too,
over
so
for the
nobody can
LR a
complain
little bit
too
here,
much.
John.
Yeah, please do. Go for it.
Now, this is a little bit easier because I'm just going to cover the real sections. I'm not going to talk about experimentals. And the reason we don't do that is the experimentals, when we have those conversations, it actually gets worse. Hopefully, especially when it comes to LR, people follow the advice that I gave in the crystal ball, which was take copious notes when you are done with your test so that you can figure out, especially if you had 3R, which one was scored, which was real, because we're going to go ahead and list multiple topics in each section. So let's start off with the first one, which is 25 questions. This was one of the sections, came off of a test that we predicted from June 2022. This is a section that we've seen on multiple occasions. We've got a lot of information on this section. So I think we feel pretty comfortable that we could name most, if not all, of the questions in here. Let's start off. One of the questions that's probably most interesting is about crows remembering masks. People trying to come and catch them, and then they come back later on and they have masks on. The crows, being a super intelligent birds, like, I know that mask, and will identify that and then kind of semi-attack that person. Then there was a question about rock wall cave paintings and the little squiggles and the stars and arrows around them, and whether or not that depicted kind of like some kind of shamanistic experience or part of the practice of being a shaman. Then about the consent to record telephone calls. There's another one about giant ant fossils. I don't like ants that much, so that doesn't sound great to me. And climate. The question about prophecies by St. Malachi and their origin. Did Malachi write them, or could some of them have been faked and given credit to Malachi? There's another one about human evolution and diet and how cooking and the addition of meat changed the way we take in calories and things of that nature. There's another one about research about 65-year-old and how that affects a country's carbon footprint, declines somewhat, then it can rise a little bit. And then finally, a question that I'm sure is pretty comical, dogs witnessing other dogs getting treats. And then if they don't get treats, eventually they stop shaking hands in response to that. And that was the last question on that particular section.
That's right.
So pretty interesting section overall. Obviously, giant ants, St. Malachi, dogs. I like it. Crows in particular. I'm a big fan of crows.
A lot of fun nature topics in that section.
Yeah. Not the toughest section out there. I'm not saying it was easy. I'm never saying anything's really easy. But from an LSAT standpoint, there are tougher sections out there. And one of the other sections that we have a lot of information about, that probably qualifies as being on the harder side here. So this was a section that had 26 questions. It came off the October 2023 LSAT. So if you go back and look at the recording of the crystal ball, you'll see that we were predicting content to be used from this exam. It's also appeared previously on the February 2022 LSAT. Here's a few of the questions to help you identify where this appeared on your test. Memory in children ages 3 to 7. A question about a good archer, somebody who's shoots arrows extremely well. And then at the end, the person is being put to death and they decide not to actually shoot an arrow, because they're worried that if they miss, their good reputation will be sullied, which seems to be like, we must not be good of an archer. But anyway, that was my reaction to hearing that story. How kind of like fists evolved and relating to, did they evolve for punching? Question about Pluto. Why can't we call Pluto a planet anymore? Another question about fossilized leaves, specifically Glossopteris ferns being on different continents. Question about, should bike helmets be mandatory? I want to address that. And then a question that a lot of people remembered, about 20% of employees at the central building or the central office are accountants, but they make up 30% of a conference or a group. And then another one about orcas using echolocation to hunt fish, but not using echolocation to hunt mammals, even in extremely dark water. So that was another scored section.
Yeah, let me make a quick 2 points about that. I think first, that's probably the hardest of the scored sections in LR that we saw, and a lot of people would, I would believe, agree with that. A lot of people also said that accountant's question was the toughest question that they saw all week.
Yep.
Again, that's a bit of a part to whole error, just because it's the hardest section and that's the hardest question, and it doesn't mean it's the hardest question overall. Little flaw tip. But secondly, notice that this comes from a test that we have already talked a little bit about, October of 2023, which is also where zebra mussels and jazz reading comp came from. So people who went the extra mile and went back and listened to our podcast recording of a recap of October 23 knew that this was a real section because we talked about it back then. They knew that zebra mussels was a real section because we talked about it back then. They got a leg up, and this was the second most, as we said, likely test to appear. The first most likely, June 23, with CITES treaties and all the rest of those topics in RC. So that's why I think we're safe giving ourselves an A in terms of the crystal ball predictions here. They were useful and continue to prove to be so.
Yeah, and when we come up and do the September mini ball, we're going to remove all that content and roll in the next batch of new content.
Correct.
But let's continue on with real LR right now. I think this next question, if I recall correctly, was 25 questions.
I think so.
Some of the questions that were in here was a debate about universal basic income. And of course, my theory that based on AI, it's coming. That's not in the question. That's just a sidebar social note. But this one was more about the impact on community connections and employment rates. Question about chickadees, adding more D's to the end of their calls when they think they're in danger, and talking a little bit about pygmy owls and I think hawks and falcons in there. Then a question about medication regulation. One of the pills is banned, even though it's just as safe as another. So why aren't both of them banned?
Right.
Then a question about crocodiles being cold-blooded, descendants warm-blooded, and crocodiles must have diverged from a common ancestor. And then another about lizards, kind of like geckos, sunning themselves and producing vitamin D. And then whether we should tax sugary drinks. We can fund our project and people will be healthier because they drink fewer sugary drinks. And then a food critic visited 100 restaurants and they tested the DNA of fish off the menu and found repeatedly that the DNA test showed that it wasn't the fish that people ordered. So people were not getting the dish that they thought. They ordered sea bass and then they didn't get that.
Right.
Or they ordered trout and they got something else. That was another real section. I don't think as challenging, it's always challenging, but not quite as challenging as the prior section we just talked about.
And that was a brand new section as well. That was not a reuse as far as we could tell.
Exactly. Brand new, but scored for sure.
Yes.
And then one more scored section for sure. Also a brand new usage. Also, I think 25 questions. More questions about sonar. We're seeing a lot of this. Somebody is an expert in sonar echolocation among water animals and is writing a series of questions about this.
We see
like
it a lot with bats too. Yeah.
Say that again?
We see it a lot with bats too. They're loving echolocation.
We see it with somebody talking about ancient Mayan civilizations, for example. And again, someone might say like, oh, they're trying to confuse you. No, it works to confuse you when you see similar topics, but it happens because someone who is writing questions for them knows quite a bit about these topics. So they keep writing different versions of questions about the same source. So this sonar helps scientists learn more about endangered species of whales. Environmentalists are saying that the sonar hurts the whales. So a lot of stuff about sonar and echolocation. You can see how it would be confusing because we had another question up above that we talked about where orcas use echolocation, but these are different questions. Another question in this section is about professional chefs and the cookware that they use. Is it aluminum or stainless steel? There's a company trying to develop meal replacement drinks, but they're unlikely to be successful. Another one. A city asserts that there's a littering problem, but you know what? That assertion is unjustified because no citizens have sent in complaints. And then a question about bumblebees and their habitat and migration. Some had moved up to 300 kilometers from the southern border, but the northern border was unchanged. So climate's probably not the cause of this kind of habitual movement or migration pattern. Got another question about a parasite that turns caterpillars and worms red. And robins do not eat the red caterpillars and worms. And the parasite does this in order to prevent the host from being eaten so that the parasite can continue to live. Typical parasite behavior. And then last in that section, not the last question, but the last one we'll cover, is that great tennis players cannot be great coaches. I think there's some proof against that out there, but far be it from me to pontificate about sports here.
Yeah, I think that one was kind of a conditional reasoning situation where great coaches have these qualifications, but tennis players only have one, so they can't be. And it went on and on. Yeah, and some of these things when we talk about like parasite turns caterpillars, worms red, it's because we got mixed reports on was it a caterpillar, was it a worm? Was that one about the lizards, geckos sunning themselves? Were they lizards, geckos, chameleons? We hear different things from people. But the overall gist, hopefully you can still match that to a question. I don't think there were too many where lizards sunning themselves and producing vitamin D, for instance, in the prior section Dave covered, would be too mysterious to people. Or a parasite turning caterpillars red and robins avoiding caterpillars would be like, wait, I think I had 2 on that. I can't imagine that's the case.
No, we had enough information to know that, hey, it's the same question that we're talking about.
Right.
Sometimes little details could be slightly different. But all of that conversation brings us to the scaling matrix that we talk about. So I'm going to give not so much of a disclaimer, but a mini explanation up front, and then I'm going to burn through this, and then we will be done, John. First off, what we're going to attempt to do is talk about all the real content and only the real content. We're not going to talk about any experimentals, and we're going to try to give you a guide for using the difficulty as to how this would affect the top line scoring of the test. And so the baseline that we start off is hey, how many questions can you miss to get a 170? And our approach is that we're going to start by saying you can miss 7 questions. And then if a section is in the middle, we're going to say that doesn't affect it. And if you had that as a scored section, you'd still be at missing 7 questions. But if you have a section that's really hard, that can move it so that maybe you can miss 8 questions now to get a 170, or 9 if it keeps compounding. So what you do here is you start by saying, all right, -7 to get a 170. And then I'll go through each section and say, this is our estimation of how it will affect the difficulty. Typically, if we're uncertain, where John and I have an internal debate, we'll take the more conservative number because that will give the best possible outcome for people. There will be fewer test day surprises. So if you have a disagreement with that, that's okay. Everybody's allowed to have their own opinion. We've kind of compiled a number of pieces of different information. Some of these sections we feel really comfortable about because we've seen them multiple times now. But obviously, this is an estimation, and it'll be whenever they release these tests in the future, then we'll know for sure. But we've been very accurate in the past. We're usually right on the nose or off by 1 at most with these scales. So everybody starts at -7, meaning you can miss 7 questions to get a 170. If you had the CITES Treatise RC with the skepticism with Descartes and Santayana and the eukaryotes, prokaryotes that we had predicted would be used, unfortunately, this is a hard section, but fortunately, it would move your scaling from 7 to 8. So you could miss 8 questions. What you will see online later on is -8. So if you had that, yes, it was hard, but you get a little bit of a benefit and it loosens your scale at 170. And that translates down to some extent throughout lower scores. What if you had the section from October of 2023 that we talked about, the jazz passage, the Simone Weil, the contract law, and the zebra mussels section? This of the 3 sections was probably the most reasonable and I think the easiest to read just from a topical standpoint. We're going to say that this would not move your scaling. You would stay at -7. All right, and then last, the people who were hating life, who got Invisible Man, blackmail, the causality in the stock market. The good news for you is that our estimation is really that this probably moved the scale 1.5. Let me explain what that means, because if you have never heard this before, you're probably thinking, like, how the hell does that happen? There are whole numbers there. What we're saying is the 1 is you'd move from 7 to 8. All right, so you're good there. The 0.5 actually shows that it has further effects downscale when you get to 165, 160, 155, and so on. This has a larger effect because of the difficulty. Some of the sections really tough to read, some difficult questions in there. So you get kind of a benefit of sorts from having gone through a really tough section. I do think most people would say, yeah, I'd really rather not have the tough section, even if I do get that back end kind of like bonus or bump. So at the 170 level, you'd still be at -8. All right, so CITES and Invisible Man would move you from 7 to 8. Jazz and zebra mussels would keep you at 7. So everybody at this point is at 7 or 8. And if you had Invisible Man, you're like, well, I got a little bit extra bonus, say at 160 from that. They would have probably loosened it another question because these scales are not uniform. They move around. So that's what that 0.5 is. John, comfortable?
Yeah, so far.
Good. Let's go to LR.
Yeah, do it.
Let's start with the first. And here you're going to have 2 LR sections. And the good news is most of them are about the same, but just to make sure that everybody understands. I'm going to read each one and add it up. So here you'll add up 2 numbers from this to either your 7 or 8. Start with the June 2022, the section about crow mass, recording phone calls, giant ants, the carbon footprint. That section we think is in the middle and is not going to move the scale. So no matter what you were at before, 7 or 8, you'd stay right there. Then we'll go to the section from October 2023 that we had talked about. This is memory in children, that Archer worry about reputation, the Glossopteris fossilized leaves, the 20%, 30% accountant's question, and then the orcas hunting with echolocation. We think this moves the scale by 1. So let's say you had those first 2 sections, you would now add 1. So if you were at 7 before, you'd go to -8 to get a 170. If you were at 8 coming out of RC, you'd go to -9. You could miss 9 questions. And then the last 2 aren't going to move the scale. The chickadees, crocodiles, the lizards, the sugary drink, that does not move the scale. And then the cookware, bee migration, the worm parasite color, and the tennis coaches, that also does not move the scale. You'd have to have that 20%, 30% accountant question to move the scale by 1 in LR. Otherwise, most LR is balanced to be in the middle, quite honestly, which is why the majority of times we do this, it doesn't move the scale, or it moves it by, say, 0.5. We didn't have that this time, so a couple fewer options than before. And that's that with the matrix.
Yeah, so we've got all the way from a -7 to a -9 possibility here as I see it. I don't think anybody gets to a -10. I'd be a little surprised by that.
You could make the argument 9.5.
Yeah.
But that's still going to be 9 at the 170 level.
That's what I'm really talking
is
about.
down.
Yeah, I think there'll be some, 165s, 163s that get the bump from the Invisible Man, but I don't know that 170s is necessarily going to get an extra point.
And by the way, sometimes we get comments afterwards. It's like, look, I am a 175 score. That section was super hard. I'm like, exactly. That's why you got the movement by a question. But they expect that if you are that level of score, you're good. You're not supposed to miss questions. You're only allowed to miss 7, 8 questions on the whole test, typically. 9 as well. So that's just the way that it is. I hate to bring it up again, but that's what it is.
No, that's full circle, man. What a nice bookend.
I did that for you, Jon.
Thank you, buddy. I feel like I was due.
For better or worse, the news will come out on Wednesday, August 27th at 9 a.m. Eastern. Obviously, we want everyone to just go out and crush the test. So we certainly hope that you have done that and that all of this is good news. For those of you with the Invisible Man, hopefully a lot of you thought that it wasn't that bad. Somebody I saw had said, I read that book recently, and I was like, lucky you. Although it wasn't so much about that, it was more about the comic stuff. But regardless, any little bit helps in terms of that. So we'll be around on the 27th and wishing everybody well. Last words, Jon?
No, I'm
good.
I'm levitating. Those 2 extra espresso shots did the trick. Stayed awake all the way through this whole thing. Nice effort on the Matrix and all the other stuff here. Congratulations to everyone getting through this. Appreciate all your help. Again, I talked to what had to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 800 plus people over the past week or so. I don't think that's an exaggeration. And I can't thank each and every one of you enough. You guys were really remarkable and resilient. And we're wishing you the best here in a couple weeks. If you are taking that retake, same as always goes for you. We're still thinking about you and wishing you well as well.
Absolutely. And on that note, if you get a chance, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere else that you may find it. And if you've enjoyed it, leave us a comment and a rating as well. We always appreciate that. And if you have any questions or you want to supply some additional information, or if even there was a section out there you're like, I think I got this, but I'm not sure you covered it, send us the information. You can send that to lsatpodcast@powerscore.com. On that note, we are done, Jon. Everybody else, stay safe out there. We will talk to you soon.